My name is Dave Willis. I'm People and Wildlife Officer for Kingsmead Reserve. I do a few other little bits and bobs for the Hertford Middlesex Wildlife Trust. And today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the wild spaces managed by the Trust in and around Hertford. So without further ado, I shall share my screen if it all works. And as these things sometimes don't, excuse the stray capital letter there. I've noticed just as I started sharing. But we're going to go on a bit of a journey in this talk. We're going to go from the sort of west to east. Once my across Hertford, sort of down the valley, and really try and think about rather than a series of discrete sites which we might talk about considering in great individual detail. What I'm going to try and do is give a bit of a picture of landscape context of what we're trying to do as an organisation, what you might come to appreciate and understand as per that warm introduction regarding the habitat that Hertford sits in. And really, the best way of doing that is from the rock up. So we're going to start at Panshanger and follow the Mimram, follow the Bean down through their confluence to the east to, let's face it, the biggest and best reserve, which is Kingsmead. So it's Hertford sits on this kind of a plateau between two river valleys, underlain by several different types of chalk, and covered over by various glacial tills and alluvial sediment. It was the former route of the Thames and continues to contribute to that drainage system via the Lee Valley. And the towns of Hertford and Ware sit on the confluence of these rivers, as I'm sure you know, which has led to all sorts of historic conflicts and commercial and economic difficulties and opportunities. And it has ramifications for the environment around them, not least, of course, the chalk streams. Now, chalk streams are globally rarer than pandas, so they really are a very treasured local resource. But hopefully what this talk will give you a flavour of is the combination of the geology, the climate, weather systems, and historic land use, and how this has come together to produce this increasingly linked, or hopefully increasingly linked, habitat that we can see now. So, starting off, excuse me, I've just skipped. I don't know if anybody knows John Catt's really helpful book, tome on the geology of Hertfordshire, but this is a badly taken photograph from that, and it's you don't have to read it in great detail, even if you could, and it just shows you the two chalks. Those two green tones are two different ages of chalk, and they feature heavily in the nature of Hertford and its immediate surroundings, and in terms of the environment and habitat that we see. Overlying this are a series of alluvial and glacial tills, which are sort of variously sorted sediments which have been deposited since the last glaciation across this valley, and then these are cut through by various rivers, most significantly the Mimram, Bean, the Rib, and latterly the new river from, as I say, Kingsmead, which we'll look at the end. So we're going to start with Panshanger Park, and these slides are helpfully produced by my colleague, who is the People and Wildlife Officer, Joe Whitaker, for Panshanger Park. I'm sure this is a site that is very, very familiar to all of you, and I'm not going to drill down too deeply into the history of the fascinating history of this area, indeed, its house, its orangery, and what's happened or not or should have happened to that estate in that park. But what is very significant is the chalk stream structure that runs through it, and we'll be looking at how that continues down into Hertford, and is characterises that environment. But this map of that area and of that park shows shows well the river systems that come in and through Hertford. And Hanshanger has a very prominent parkland. It's a listed, it's a capability brown landscape, but it also has very prominent and very clear chalk streams that the Wildlife Trust is working alongside Tarmac Council to maintain and preserve. There are problems with scrub, there are problems with Himalayan balsam, and that we're working with a very enthusiastic group, of which some of you may or may not be members, of volunteers that are working hard, or certainly will be once we're allowed back on site, to keep this in check and to maintain this. But it's a fascinating habitat. It's like, it really epitomises a lot of the Hertford environment in that it's intensely anthropogenic. It's human activity has really shaped it and sculpted it, and we have to maintain that. And this is a theme that will come up in all of the sites we look at. Really, there has to be ongoing involvement in order to maintain it as the habitat it is. So you can see the longhorn cattle there that are grazing to maintain the parkland, to maintain the landscape as we want it, to keep the floristic interest for various pollinator species that we trying to encourage on the site. The orangery is a huge historical interest, and I don't intend to go into the very complicated history and toings and froings of where houses have been sited across the valley over since Henry VIII decided to chop people's heads off, and even before. But it just shows the historic and human significance of a lot of these sites. In terms of wildlife, there's a very great richness of flora and fauna there. From as this photo demonstrates, one of my, as was mentioned in the introduction, I have yet to see a wasp spider, which is the top right of those four photographs, a warm weather visitor that is now spreading northwards up the country. Lovely shot of the chalk stream there flowing fast and clear over that lovely gravelly and hard substrate, and that continues as a feature down through towards where through the other sites we're going to look at. One of the oldest trees in the park, the largest protected tree on the oaks, is characteristic of the park-grown trees in this part of Hertfordshire, and really just a beautiful site, famous for its osprey, famous for its fish, and rich invertebrate, and I have to say, because I always do, amphibian and reptile life is thriving there. So moving on, as we move down through Hertford, through our reserves, is a smaller, lesser known site, Willowmead, which sits on the Mimram, just immediately west of the train line. As you sort of come in past, just from Hartingford Bury, as you start to move come into the town, south of the A414, there's a very small but perfectly formed reserve on the banks of the Mimram, right next to some residential housing tucked behind them, and a lovely home to some incredibly aquatic invertebrate environments, which are themselves sit at the bottom of an ecological pyramid, supporting things like water shrews and other species which feed on these. It has certainly been historically home to water voles, and they hang on further east, and I'll talk about a little bit more about them and what we're looking to do. But it houses, it's home to a wide variety of woodland bird species, and certainly owls, which I heard the other night on my visit. Um, and it's covered by boardwalks, so you can get across it. Very deep mud, and it's part of the floodplain. And we'll talk about the importance of this of flooding and floodplain meadows and saturated grounds as the talk progresses. But I had to admit that when I was invited to do this talk, I wanted to talk about these sort of sites. I'd never been to Willowmeads, and as part of my sort of amphibian reptile role, amphibian reptile group role, I thought it was important that I went and had a look to see what herpetological life was supported. And sure enough, last night I saw this little frog, found this little frog down there in one of these little ponds. Amphibians don't particularly like moving water, so in the still ponds, which are filled by rain and by the flooding of the Mimram, you get these amphibian populations. And again, it's an indicator of the extraordinary vertebrate life that goes on to support some of the higher taxa, the birds and the mammals. Some of you may know Bean Marsh. It's a real success story for local people. It's right by the train station, again, as we come into Hertford. And due to fantastic effort by local people, money's been raised and it's been given to HMWT to be managed. And we all had a very rainy day last year, just when we could last all go out together and had a look round. This again, a small but really important little site on the floodplain, the River Bean, as it comes into Hertford. And we're battling scrub all the time. Everywhere in Hertfordshire wants to become scrubland, wants to become woodland, if allowed, without these grazing regimes. I'll talk a little bit about this historic grazing regime at Kingsmead later on, but this will be one of our first steps to Bean Marshes. Once the breeding birds, the ground breeding birds, have done their thing this year, we're going to be putting in some funded fencing, so we can have some kind of grazing regime taking place on Bean Marshes to manage the scrub and get the vegetation diversity and structure the way we like to. Informing that will be an NBC survey, a baseline survey of the floristic richness, just really seeing what is there. I'll be there looking for reptiles and amphibians, probably spiders, and other local groups and recorders are taking interest in their various groups. We would like to increase public awareness of its importance as a site, but there are no general plans for public access. It's not somewhere that perhaps people even want to walk over due to how wet and inaccessible it often is. But it's not something we're planning on opening up to encouraging a great amount of high footfall. But a lovely little place overlooked by residences, and really obvious and a nice way of showcasing the importance of Hertford's natural spaces to commuters using the train, and it's a very busy area in terms of foot traffic and commuting and cars. We're working with the local railways who have sort of similar roles to me, I suppose, community outreach staff, to really engage them with habitat and environment along the lines. And I work very closely with the new river line. And so hopefully we'll be able to get something set up in terms of promotion of this site with them in due course. But I thought we'd digress. I thought we'd meander away from the river, if you like, and just have a little bit of a think about some of the habitats that we've really lost across Hertfordshire, and that we retain pockets of in the area surrounding Hertford, and that's heathland. Heathland is a very rare habitat, much like chalk stream, and the habitat we are left with in Hertfordshire is as depleted and as impoverished as it is in some other areas. And the point about heathland, it's well drained, it's heavily grazed, and it requires a specific geology. Now, the sand and gravel extraction that goes on at Panshanger Park, or used to go on Panshanger Park, and indeed across Hertfordshire, just shows that we do have the right geology for it. We could have these well drained heathland areas, and indeed we did once. But we have to preserve the pockets we retain, and two of the most significant are Hertford Heath, which is a sort of it's sort of split into two habitats, if you like. A southern, more open area near to sort of the track where Ballswood, for people who know it, and then a rather more closed northern area. And it's a superbly rich habitat in terms of invertebrate life and plant life, and life. But and there are ongoing projects there and into Ballswood to talk about to try and maintain this floristic richness, to keep it grazed, to keep it short, to even keep areas of bare soil, so we get that succession of species that can utilise these sort of barer, more drained areas away from tree cover. Really great for all sorts of events that we run throughout the year. I went for an amazing gall spotting event, which I highly recommend to anybody. Really a fascinating site, and always something to see there throughout the year. Waterford Heath, we manage on behalf of Tarmac. This is a little bit further away from Hertford still, but again, it shows how scrub-like, how heath-like, how dry the area could have been several hundred years ago, before land use, before drainage use changed. This is a particularly interesting site, Waterford Heath, for a particular species of butterfly, and spring is coming. So I hope you'll all, if you can, once we're allowed out to play, take advantage of the site and go and see this little chap. This is the grizzled skipper butterfly, relatively rare heathland species, but we do have a population hanging on in Waterford Heath that dissipates across the county, which is the idea with all of these habitats, to try and connect them as much as we can. And so this is the famous grizzled skipper, which is one of the important species for which we try and manage with that site. So this is just coming now out the other side of Hertford to Kingsmead, and I'm not sure whether people know it, but it sits between Hertford and Ware, and it is on the west edge of it is the confluence of the Rib and the Bean and the New River, or the River Lee, sorry. And the New River starts at Kingsmead from a spring. Becomes St Chad's Well. It's water that comes down again through the chalk from as far away as Brookman's Park and South Moons to sit on some on a slightly more clay-rich rock and provide home and habitat for a variety of bird species and other things, which I'll talk about later. But again, I thought I'd just show you this, which just shows you, as I was saying, this is how the Bean and the Rib come down, and this is the River Lee, the Lee navigation that borders the northern edge to the A10 viaduct, and this is the source of the New River here. In the 17th century, early 18th century, they realised that they couldn't get enough water from the spring here, so that they cut a navigation an extraction from the Lee to the New River, which they monitor with two gauge houses, one 18th century one and one later 19th century one. But this is the last of our sort of reserves across Hertford as you move down the Lee Valley to Amwell, to Ryemeads, and these other sort of wetland river sites. And it's also one of our more challenging sites. It's got an incredible wildlife. Some is resident, some is migratory. But it's got an awful lot of footfall, and my role is funded by the National Lottery, the Heritage Lottery Fund, to try and integrate people and wildlife on the site, to promote and understand the wildlife of the site, and to communicate it to the people who are using the site, who are visiting. And again, this has all been underpinned by surveys and by an understanding of the animals that are there. And we're working very closely with Thames Water, with the Environment Agency, who own part of it. It's all a bit complicated. We don't own as much of Kingsmeads as we would like in terms of the management, but we have some very, very keen and supportive partnership agencies who are on board with a lot of our schemes. And it has been historically, I don't know, perhaps if we have a bit of a discussion at the end, people can tell me about their own sort of local experiences, but it's somewhere that has been historically overlooked, and the scrub has really started to encroach. It has really started to cover up some of the key and more important habitats that are there, and this is one of our priority, our areas that we're focusing on in terms of the work that we're doing. And these photos taken in 2017, immediately prior to, the start of the work, show the sort of habitat degradation that was going on at Kingsmeads. So, sort of working round clockwise from the bottom left of your screen. This is looking south from the New River across the pools that I mentioned, where the water sits at Chadwell Bank. Now, the rest of this, for those of you who are local, the chalk slope becomes the golf course above the Ware Road, but there is a sliver of it on the site that runs along the southern edge that we are very keen to see restored back to good quality chalk grass, and to encourage things like chalky blues, appropriate vetch species, and others wherever we can. We already have a scabious and a good range of plants there, but we have this problem with bramble, with hawthorn, and this sort of encroachment. So one of our first jobs has been, as soon as we had volunteers back on site this year, to really push back this scrub. This is close to the viaduct, and the opening up of this area and the improvements this has made have almost immediately been obvious, both in terms of reflected by comments made by people who are using the site and by the animals that are starting to use this area. On Monday, I found great crested newts and smooth newts, pretty much for that lady standard. We've continued this across the slope to, again, this ongoing battle with trees, which sounds somewhat counterintuitive given a lot of the conservation messages that are heard. Grassland, wetland has a huge carbon lockdown potential, and of course it encourages a whole different set of biodiversities. And this is something that we're really trying to push. So it can look quite savage, it can look quite almost harsh, but this is what we're trying to do in order to encourage pollinators, bees, butterflies, and those sort of animals which make use of these kind of habitats. And you can see the real difference that's being made. Little note on the viaduct, which is, I think, it's completed in 1978. It's a sort of steel cable supported structure encased in concrete. We're working with local, with Herts County Council and some local street artists and some nationally very famous street artists who specialise in wildlife themed work. And we're looking to try and have some of these viaduct pillars decorated with artworks which reflect the biodiversity and the natural richness of the environment and some of its history, and just kind of brighten the place up and develop that sense of local ownership and enjoyment, rather than it being an eyesore to be overlooked, which I think sometimes can be the feeling from visitors. Opening up viewpoints, opening up vistas, is hugely important for enriching that visitor experience and allowing monitoring of the wildlife. There's been a gap in the monitoring of wetland birds, which I've just taken on the mantle of wetland bird surveying, which takes place monthly with data going back to the BTO, and these sort of viewpoints over these wetland areas really do support that, really do help that. Importantly, for those who know the site, these two pans, these two pools, are very shallow, which means dogs can run across them, which is a problem in and of itself. But they dry out, and this can cause some alarm. People see them, and they're not deep. And this was taken last August, last July, and this is great for amphibians, and it's great for odonata, for damselflies and dragonflies, because it means there's no fish, and these will predate these animals in their early life stages. And this periodic drying out actually has an awful lot of ecological benefits. And actually, these sort of water bodies that do this are relatively rare across the county, and apparently quite important. This, incidentally, do you remember we had that really heavy weekend of rain in August? It'd been dry for a while, we had a really heavy weekend, and by the Monday, this was awful again, as was this is the imaginatively named West Pool, and the other side of the causeway is the equally creative East Pool. Coming back to this map again, which I zoomed in for the sake of my colleagues the other day, there are two different types of chalk. There is a slightly older, more porous, whiter one. I don't know whether you can still see me on the camera, which is this stuff, which makes up the Chadwell Bank. There, it used to be quarried. You're not able to go into it, but there is a mine back into that bank, a chalk mine, and this drains through onto a more marl-rich chalk, which is that lighter green stuff for the purposes of this map, which is slightly less porous. So it sort of sits there, and of course there's the overlying, there's the overburden of till and stuff. But this is why the water sits there slightly longer than it might on the chalk that actually drains through from as far away as Brooklands Park and South Mid. So this is left to right, a volunteer work party beavering away, and they were the last ones we could do in December, opening up that causeway, opening it up for visitors and for views over the pools, with the west on the left and the east on the right. And this is on the right of your screen is a group of University of Third Age U3A enthusiasts that I took round in December, and just pausing, and they took advantage of the newly cleared Chadwell Bank to look out. It wasn't posed, honestly, at some of the visiting gadwall, shoveler, and other wildfowl species that visit Kingsmeads in the winter. And one of the other priorities, as you probably saw in the objectives, was to clear some of the ditches. Now, these are hugely important in terms of biodiversity on the site. We'll talk about water voles a little bit later, but water voles are surveyed for every year on Kingsmeads, and they like quiet, undisturbed, mink-free, well-vegetated, good quality aquatic habitat, of which there used to be lots. Now, before they cut that big navigation, many of you probably know this, and forgive me if I'm telling things you already know, but along the north edge of Kingsmeads runs the canal, the Lee navigation. Previously, the Lee meandered across, hundreds of years ago, across the meads, and the manifold ditch / black ditch that is here, that you can see here, was its old route. And it's also a cracking habitat for dragonfly and damselfly nymphs and water voles, and of course reptiles and amphibians. And it got very choked, and it was something that we wanted to focus on clearing out. So this is what we did in the summer. We hired a digger, and under guidance, not too harshly, we cleared out some patches to get some nice open water, to encourage water violets, to encourage that sort of botanic diversity. This guy was really good. He just sort of followed instructions. He worked a lot alongside us, a lot, just to really carefully pick out. So if you know the site, we've got this is looking back towards Hertford. You've got the viaduct to your back, and this is just clearing out an area. Now we're going to have a dragonfly trail here for visitors as part of the lottery bid. We're going to have 3 trails on site. They're going to be signposted, little signs down here ready to go. And this is going to be a great site for viewing the various species of damselfly and dragonfly that visit the site or appear on the site in shifts. We get about 18 species of damselfly and dragonfly on the site, so it's a really important habitat for them. And occasionally we'll catch a glimpse of a water vole because the signs are certainly there when we did our survey in September. And these piles of muck go by the grand name of arisings, I found out when I took this role on, and they're left in piles alongside on the bank to allow any sort of invertebrates and creepy crawlers to make their way back to the water. So it's as non-destructive as possible. It is, of course, to a degree, but this reed mace, this typhon needs to come out because it really can clog up, and then, of course, you'll lose the ditch altogether in the fullness of time. And this is it today. It's nicely open. It was in the summer, nicely open. We've got some lovely drone footage of the site and this habitat nicely improved. As Malcolm mentioned in the introduction, one of the really important things that we're doing, not just on Kingsmead, but across all of our sites, trying to engage people like yourselves and other community groups who are interested enough and concerned enough about wildlife and the environment to visit these sites and to get involved. And you're most welcome to. And there's some interesting people we've got here. That I've given lots of talks to the University of Third Age Youth who are super keen and enthusiastic to get involved. We run work talks for carers, particularly young people who are carers, so they can get out and get involved in nature. In April, I'm going to be doing a session for key workers from the NHS, people who might have been stressed and worried and given anxiety from their incredibly important work they've been doing during the sort of COVID year, so that they can spend some time out on the meets. Local cub groups, scout groups, brownies, they'll be coming out to do a lot of online talks to them. We've been working with a group of nature writers from BAME backgrounds, the Willow Journal. They'll be doing some writing inspired by Kingsmead and by other local environments. But it just gives you a flavour of some of the people that we're really actively engaging and are really showing an interest, alongside your more typical naturalists and bird watchers who are producing some amazing sort of photographs and records from the site. It's also, interestingly, the first location for Hertfordshire air ambulances ever rescued. This was in 2009. A dog walker broke her leg, and it was the first place that Hert's air ambulance ever were called out to. So there's a little more recent claim to fame beyond its more historic ones. So I said before that the sort of the idea of this talk, the theme of this talk, the flavour of this talk was just to get you thinking about how these habitats connect down this valley, down into the Lee, and how habitat connectivity, particularly for certain species, is really important. It's all literally and figuratively underpinned by the chalk, and by people, by this community that have used the rivers, that have used this landscape for hundreds of years. And this support continues. There's a lot of historical interest, a lot of industrial archaeology and civic history, from Roman roads through Civil War rebellions through to Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monastery, through to the funding of the renting of Hertford's post office through grass cut and sold from Kingsmead. But that's for another talk, another day. What we're trying to do as a trust, as a wildlife trust, focusing on wildlife, is to think about habitat corridors. So water vole, massive decline in this adorable animal. The photo there by my colleague Tim Hill. They are found up and down this valley, and we're going to be reintroducing some to just boost their numbers, get them spread out. Now we're on top of the mink. We monitored all the environment for American mink, which love to nothing more than eating water vole. It's also like to be very important for other species. Common lizards are huge numbers on Kingsmeads, and they are also thought to be in decline, as are common toads. Dormice, we're doing some work surveying for them at Baldwood, in case you have forgotten. It's a woodland site immediately south of, immediately next to Hertford Heath. I would bring up tubes there and developing understory forest for them, understory woodland for dormice. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your ideas on this idea of connectivity, sort of through and beyond Hertford, and how it can be improved. But that's really it's monitoring and linking up these sites and the wildlife that uses them. That is our main objective, and that landscape level conservation over the next 10 years, and the habitat management plan for Kingsmeads will be into the next decade.